This story is pretty detailed, so I'm going to get right into it. Only relevant details, though. I'm 22 years old, freshly graduated from college. Since I was maybe 3 or 4, my family has lived in a 3-story home in a relatively nice area. If you're picturing the quintessential suburban neighborhood, wide streets, trimmed lawns, identical mailboxes, houses that look different only if you stare long enough, you've got the right idea. It's the kind of place people move to because they want stability, safety, predictability. The kind of place where nothing bad is supposed to happen. As for the layout of the house, this is all you need to know. My bedroom, on the 2nd floor, has a single window that faces the street. And the only window in my dad's home office, on the 3rd floor, also faces the street. That's it. No other windows in the house look out onto the front of the property. Every other room faces the backyard or the sides. I never thought that mattered. The reason I'm writing this is because after the events of last week, I'm now 100% convinced something sinister has been happening to my family for reasons I can't even begin to understand. And if I'm connecting the dots correctly, and I'm pretty sure I am, it's been going on for years. The first relevant thing happened so long ago that I don't even remember exactly how old I was. I was young enough to still be in middle school, so it had to have been at least 10 years ago. It was either a Saturday or a Sunday. I didn't have school. I remember that clearly, because I woke up later than usual and felt that lazy, floating relief that only weekends give you when you're a kid. I was walking downstairs for breakfast when I overheard my parents talking in the kitchen. I didn't catch much of the conversation at first, just murmured voices, the clink of a mug on the counter, but then I heard my dad say something like, "It happened again." His tone wasn't panicked. It wasn't angry. It was controlled, tight, like someone carefully holding a glass that's already cracked. My mom asked him something in a lower voice. I couldn't make out the words, but I remember the way her voice dipped, as if she didn't want the house to hear her. My dad replied, "Same as before." That was when I stepped fully into the kitchen, still in pajamas, expecting them to stop talking or switch topics like adults usually do when kids enter the room. They didn't. They just looked at me. Too quickly. Like they'd both been waiting for the sound of footsteps and were relieved and annoyed at the same time when they finally heard them. "What happened again?" I asked. "Nothing. Just a beat too long of silence." My dad smiled, one of those smiles that exists only to reassure someone else, and said, "Nothing you need to worry about." My mom nodded a little too eagerly. "Go grab some cereal." I did, because that's what kids do. But even then, something about it stuck with me. Not the words themselves, but the way they said them. Like they were repeating lines they'd practiced before. What had happened again? And how many times had it happened before that morning? They didn't tell me what was going on. Not then, not later that day, not even when I asked again that week. They actually didn't tell me directly for over a year afterward. I learned the real story a few days later from my older brother. At least, what he thought was the real story. My brother was 5 years older than me, old enough to be trusted with explanations that were apparently too heavy for my still developing brain. We were sitting in his room, the door closed, the hum of his old desktop computer filling the silence. "You didn't hear this from me," he said, which of course meant I was going to hear it very clearly. Apparently, late at night, late, always after everyone was supposed to be asleep, my dad had seen someone standing across the street. Just standing there. Not walking. Not passing by. Not getting into a car. Standing. When my brother first told me, I remember being disappointed. That was it. Some guy loitering? That was the big secret? "It's not just once," my brother said, leaning back in his chair. "Dad says it keeps happening." "How many times?" He shrugged. "A lot." That word, a lot, did more work than any number could have. A lot meant pattern. A lot meant repetition. A lot meant my dad hadn't just brushed it off as coincidence. "Why doesn't he call the cops?" I asked. My brother frowned. He did. Once. And they didn't see anything. By the time they came, the guy was gone. That should have made me feel better. Instead, it made something crawl up my spine. Because if someone disappears the moment authorities show up, that means they were watching closely enough to know when to leave. Right? What does he look like? I asked. My brother shook his head. Dad never said. Just a person. At the time, that was enough for me. Kids accept ambiguity more easily than adults do. I went back to worrying about homework and video games and whether my crush would ever talk to me. But every now and then, usually at night, I'd look out my bedroom window and scan the sidewalk across the street. I never saw anyone. Years passed. Middle school turned into high school. The story faded into something like a family anecdote, filed away under weird but harmless. No one brought it up. Not my parents. Not my brother. And then, when I was 16, it happened again. Or maybe it never stopped. The second incident, or the second time I became aware of it, came on a school night. I was up later than I should have been, pretending to study while actually scrolling through my phone. That was when I noticed the light in my dad's office was on. This wasn't unusual by itself. My dad worked odd hours sometimes. What was unusual was that the light wasn't steady. It flicked off, then back on again. Then off. Then on. Curious, I went upstairs. The office door was open, and my dad was standing at the window. Not sitting at his desk. Not pacing. Just standing there, perfectly still, like he was afraid movement might draw attention. Dad! I said. He didn't respond. I said his name louder. He flinched. Actually flinched. His shoulders jumped like I'd shouted in his ear. What are you doing? I asked. He turned, and for just a second, I saw something on his face I'd never seen before. Fear. Not the dramatic kind. Not wide eyes or shaking hands. It was the kind of fear that settles in and makes itself at home. The kind that's been there a long time. Go back to bed, he said. Why? He glanced back at the window before answering. It's late. I stepped closer, trying to see what he'd been looking at. Is someone out there? No. The word came too fast. I looked anyway. The street was empty. Streetlights glowing. Parked cars lining the curb. The same safe, boring view I'd seen my whole life. There's nothing there, I said. My dad closed the blinds with a sharp pull. Exactly. That didn't make sense to me then. It does now. The next morning, my mom acted like nothing had happened. My dad went to work like always. No one mentioned the night before. But that was when I started noticing things. Little things at first. How my dad would occasionally glance at the front window during dinner, even though you couldn't see the street from the table. How my mom always locked the front door earlier than necessary, even in summer when it stayed light late. How neither of them ever sat in my room when I asked for help with homework. They'd stand in the doorway instead. Why avoid a room just because of a window? Unless the window mattered. I asked my brother about it again, but he brushed me off. You're overthinking it. Was I? Or was I just finally old enough to notice patterns? When I left for college, I thought distance would help. New city. New apartment. New routines. And it did, for a while. But every time I came home on breaks, the house felt tense. Like it was holding its breath. The neighborhood hadn't changed. Same families. Same lawns. Same quiet. Too quiet. One night during winter break, I woke up around 2 a.m. with the unmistakable feeling of being watched. I know how that sounds. Everyone says that. But this was different. It wasn't paranoia. It was instinct, sharp and immediate. I got out of bed and went to the window. Across the street, under the streetlight, someone stood on the sidewalk. Just standing there. Facing the house. They weren't hiding. They weren't trying to blend in. They were positioned perfectly in the center of the light, like they wanted to be seen. I froze. How long had they been there? Minutes. Hours. Years. I tried to make out details, but the light washed them out. All I could see was a silhouette. Average height. No visible movement. Not even a shift of weight. I wanted to wake my parents. I wanted to scream. Instead, I stood there, staring. Eventually, slowly, deliberately, the figure stepped backward, out of the light, and disappeared into the darkness between houses. They didn't run. They didn't turn their back. They just retreated. The next morning, I told my parents everything. My dad went quiet. My mom sat down. Neither of them asked me to explain further. That's when I knew. They'd been waiting for this moment. That was the first time they told me the truth. Or at least the truth as they understood it. It had started not long after we moved in. Same thing every time. Late at night. A person across the street. Always watching. Never approaching. Never interacting. Sometimes it would stop for months. Sometimes years. And then it would start again. No one else ever saw them. Neighbors never reported anything. Cameras never caught anything useful. My dad tried everything. Police. Floodlights. Even staying up all night once, watching through the blinds. That was the worst night, he said. Because whoever it was didn't leave. They stood there until sunrise. Why stand there for hours? What were they waiting for? And why us? Those were the questions my parents could never answer. Neither can I. Because last week, after graduation, after moving back home temporarily, I saw something new. Something that finally broke the illusion that this was just a stalker. At 3:17 a.m., I woke up to my phone buzzing. A message from my dad. "Are you awake?" I replied immediately. "Yes." "Why?" There was a pause. And, "Don't look out the window." Of course I did. The street was empty. But in the reflection of the glass, behind me, I saw someone standing in my doorway, watching me. And that's when I realized the worst part. The thing across the street? It was never trying to get inside. It was already here. And it always had been. If someone has been watching your house for years without acting, what does that say about their patience? If they never come closer, is it because they can't, or because they don't need to? And if everyone in your family sees the same thing, why does it always choose different moments to reveal itself? I don't know what it wants. I don't know why it chose us. But I know one thing now, with absolute certainty. Those two windows, they aren't for looking out. They're for letting something look in. And once you notice that, how do you ever stop watching back? My dad is a lawyer, the kind who never really learned how to leave work at the office. Even when he came home, work followed him like a second shadow, settling into the study at the end of the hall where a heavy oak desk faced the front window. When pressure mounted, and it often did, he worked late into the night, fueled by coffee gone bitter and the quiet hum of the neighborhood after midnight. That was what he was doing the night before I overheard him telling my mom about the incident that would later refuse to stay contained as a simple anecdote. It was close to midnight, maybe a little after, when he noticed the car. He told the story so many times over the years that the details became fixed, as if set in resin. According to my dad, he had just leaned back in his chair to stretch his neck when movement outside the window caught his eye. A Chevy Suburban, dark-colored, though he could never quite agree with himself whether it was black or a deep navy, was creeping down our street at a pace so slow it looked unnatural. 5 miles per hour, he estimated. Not a cautious roll, not a hesitant brake tap, but a steady crawl, like the vehicle was being carried forward by inertia alone. That detail always mattered to him. It wasn't just slow, it was wrong. Who drives like that at midnight in a quiet suburban neighborhood? And why? At first, he shrugged it off. People got lost. GPS directions lagged. Maybe someone was drunk, or tired, or distracted. But then, a minute or two later, he saw the same Suburban pass by again, heading the opposite direction, still crawling. Same speed. Same deliberate lack of urgency. That was when he stopped typing altogether. Why would a car drive back and forth like that? Was it searching for an address? Watching something, or someone? Or was it simply circling, killing time in the most unsettling way possible? When the Suburban slowed even more and eased into a parking spot directly across from our house, my dad's fingers froze over the keyboard. He watched as the brake lights flared briefly, then went dark. The engine stayed on, he thought, though later he admitted he wasn't completely sure. The headlights were off. The car just sat there, a dark shape against the dim glow of the street lamp. My dad kept his eyes on it for several minutes, waiting for a door to open, for a silhouette to step out, for any sign that there was a human reason behind the presence of that vehicle. Nothing happened. No interior light flicked on. No shadow crossed the windshield. It was as if the car had been placed there deliberately, like a prop in a play where the actors were late to their cues. How long would you have watched? 5 minutes? 10? At what point does curiosity turn into unease? Eventually, practicality won out. He had a filing deadline looming, and staring out the window wasn't going to make it go away. He returned to his work, though his attention fractured. Every few minutes, he glanced back up at the window, half expecting the car to be gone, half dreading that it would still be there. Hours passed. The Suburban did not move. He swore later that no one ever got out of the car. He was adamant about that. The window gave him a clear view of the street, and even in his peripheral vision he would have noticed motion. Someone stretching, slamming a door, lighting a cigarette. There was nothing. Just the car. Waiting. Sometime around 2 a.m., exhaustion finally claimed him. He fell asleep in his chair, head tilted awkwardly to one side, glasses still on his face. The document on his computer remained unfinished, the cursor blinking patiently as if keeping time. What happened while he slept remains a mystery. That gap, those 3.5 hours, would later become the most disturbing part of the story. Did the car stay there the entire time? Did it leave and come back? Did something happen that he never saw because his eyes were closed? When he woke up at around 5:30 a.m., the sky just beginning to pale with the promise of dawn, the first thing he did was look out the window. The Suburban was still there. Same spot. Same orientation. Same silence. For a few seconds, he genuinely thought he was dreaming. He blinked hard, rubbed his eyes, stood up and leaned closer to the glass. The car did not dissolve. It did not move. It remained stubbornly, undeniably real. How long can something sit in front of your house before it stops feeling like coincidence and starts feeling like a message? He watched it for another 15 minutes, heart beating faster now, the rational explanations he had relied on during the night starting to crumble. Before the sun fully rose, the Suburban finally pulled away. No sudden acceleration, no dramatic exit, just the same slow, deliberate crawl until it turned the corner and disappeared. Even after he finished his work later that morning, my dad couldn't sleep. The sense of being watched clung to him, a low-grade static under his thoughts. He didn't tell anyone right away. Not because he thought it was insignificant, but because he couldn't decide how to frame it. What do you call something that feels wrong but offers no proof of being dangerous? When he finally told my mom, I overheard them from the hallway. I was supposed to be asleep, but curiosity got the better of me. I remember the way my mom's voice shifted between skepticism and concern, the way my dad kept circling back to the same details, as if repetition might unlock meaning. In the end, they did what most people do with things that don't fit neatly into their understanding of the world. They minimized it. It was probably someone sleeping in their car, my mom suggested. Maybe someone going through a rough patch. Or, at worst, someone casing houses, though even that idea lost its teeth when years passed without incident. For a long time, the story settled into family lore. A strange night. A creepy coincidence. Nothing more. But stories don't always stay still. Years later, when I was older and more willing to ask uncomfortable questions, I learned that this hadn't been the first time my dad had seen cars behaving strangely on our street. There had been other nights, other vehicles rolling back and forth, too slow, too deliberate. He hadn't mentioned them because none had parked. None had stayed. Why didn't he tell us then? Did he think he was protecting us, or was he protecting himself from admitting that something didn't make sense? I started paying more attention after that. Not obsessively, not at first. Just little things. Cars idling longer than necessary. Headlights cutting out too quickly. The way our street felt different after midnight, as if the darkness had weight. Our neighborhood was the kind people described as quiet and safe. Tree-lined streets. Identical mailboxes. Porch lights on timers. It was the kind of place where nothing ever happened, And that, in hindsight, might have been the point. What better place to go unnoticed than somewhere no one expects to look? The first time I saw something myself, I was in high school. I'd stayed up late studying for an exam, sprawled on the living room floor with papers scattered around me. Around 1 a.m., headlights swept across the walls, slow and lingering. I remember holding my breath without realizing it. A car passed by. Then, a few minutes later, the same car came back the other way. Was it the same Suburban? I couldn't say. The angle wasn't right, and I never saw it park. But the memory of my dad's story surfaced unbidden, sending a chill up my spine. Coincidence, I told myself. Just coincidence. But how many coincidences does it take before you start to question the pattern? I didn't mention it to anyone. Part of me didn't want to give the idea power. Another part worried that if I said it out loud, it would sound ridiculous. After all, no crime had been committed. No one had been harmed. Nothing tangible had happened. And yet, over the years, the incidents accumulated like dust, easy to ignore individually, impossible to deny as a whole. A neighbor casually mentioned seeing unfamiliar cars late at night. A delivery driver once asked if our street was some kind of shortcut, because his GPS kept rerouting him there after midnight. Why after midnight? The question lingered. My dad eventually retired from law, trading late nights at the desk for early mornings in the garden. Time softened the edges of his anxiety, but it never erased it completely. Every so often, he would pause mid-sentence and glance toward the window, as if expecting to see something waiting. Once, I asked him outright if he thought the car had been watching us. He didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was careful. "I don't know who us would be," he said. "That's what bothers me. Was the house the target? The street? Or was the car never interested in us at all?" Sometimes, the most unsettling possibility is that you were never important enough to matter. I moved away eventually, as people do. College. Work. A different city with different streets and different shadows. But the story followed me, reshaping itself as I grew older. What once felt like a spooky anecdote began to feel like a fragment of something larger, something unfinished. I still visit my parents' house occasionally. The street looks the same. The trees have grown taller. The street lamp across from the house still casts the same uneven pool of light. Every now and then, when I'm awake late and the house has gone quiet, I find myself standing at the window, looking out at that familiar stretch of asphalt. Waiting. Because the question that never quite goes away is this. If the car was waiting for something, what happens if one night, whatever it was waiting for finally arrives? And if it does, will anyone notice when it leaves? Fast forward a few years. I'm 15 now, a sophomore in high school. Old enough to stay up late without my parents questioning it too much, young enough that the world still feels slightly unreal when the lights go out. When I think back on the strange things that have happened in my life, the second occurrence stands out more vividly than the first. Maybe it's because it happened to me directly. Or maybe it's because, at 15, fear feels sharper, less filtered by logic, more personal, more invasive. That night started like dozens of others. My room was dark except for the glow of my laptop screen and the faint orange light bleeding in through the blinds from the street lamp outside. I had my headphones on, heavy bass thumping softly in my ears as I worked on a beat, looping a melody, tweaking a snare, losing track of time the way only creative focus allows. Music was my escape back then. When I was making beats, everything else faded away. School stress, awkward social dynamics, the constant low hum of anxiety that seemed to follow me everywhere. My desk sat directly in front of my bedroom window. I'd always liked that placement. During the day, it let sunlight spill across my workspace. At night, it gave me a clear view of the street. Quiet, suburban, predictable. Or at least, that's what I believed. Outside, the neighborhood was still. No cars passing. No voices. Just the occasional rustle of leaves when the wind picked up. The kind of calm that makes you feel safe without thinking about it. Until something broke it. At first, it was subtle. Just a flicker of light in the corner of my vision. So brief I almost ignored it. I thought it might have been a reflection from my screen or some artifact of staring too long at waveforms and timelines. But then it happened again. Sharper this time. Deliberate. I paused the track. Silence rushed in, broken only by the faint ringing in my ears from having worn my headphones too long. I pulled one ear cup off and turned my head toward the window. That's when I saw them. 3 cars. Maybe more. They were moving slowly, unnaturally slow, down the street. Not cruising, not searching for an address. Crawling. Like predators testing the ground before stepping forward. Their headlights were on low beam, casting long shadows that stretched and warped across the pavement. At first, I felt relieved. Cars meant people. People meant normalcy. Then I noticed the flashlights. Someone in the first car leaned partially out of the passenger side window, sweeping a bright beam of white light across the houses lining the street. Not casually. Not playfully. Methodically. Each beam lingered for a second too long, tracing windows, door frames, driveways. My stomach tightened. Why would anyone be doing that? The beam moved from house to house, like it was following a checklist. When it reached my neighbor's place, it slowed even more, hovering over the front door, then the side windows. I leaned closer to the glass, heart picking up speed. Was I misunderstanding what I was seeing? Was there some reasonable explanation I was missing? Then the light shifted. It was moving toward my house. I barely had time to react before instinct took over. I slid down from my chair and dropped beneath the windowsill, my back pressed against the wall, breath held tight in my chest. The beat I'd been working on faded from my thoughts entirely. All I could hear was my heartbeat, loud and fast, like it was trying to escape my body. 2 seconds passed. Then the light hit. Even with my head ducked low, I saw it, white illumination spilling across my ceiling, cutting a clean arc above me. The beam was strong enough to penetrate the blinds, strong enough to tell me that whoever was holding it was absolutely looking inside. I stayed frozen. What were they looking for? Did they see me move? Did they know someone was awake in this house? The light lingered for a moment that felt stretched, elastic, unreal. Then it vanished. Darkness reclaimed the room. I didn't move right away. I counted in my head, slowly, deliberately. 1 Mississippi. 2. 3. By the time I reached 20, my muscles were aching from tension. When I finally raised myself enough to peek over the sill, the cars were already halfway down the block. Still moving slowly. Still scanning. I watched them reach the end of the street, turn the corner, and disappear from view. The quiet that followed felt heavier than before, like the neighborhood itself was holding its breath. I didn't sleep much that night. Every sound, a creak in the floor, the distant bark of a dog, the hum of the refrigerator, felt amplified. I replayed the scene over and over in my head, searching for logic, for reassurance. But no matter how many times I told myself it was probably nothing, the image of that flashlight on my ceiling refused to fade. Morning didn't bring relief so much as exhaustion. At breakfast, I told my parents everything. My mom listened with her arms crossed tightly, eyes narrowing as I described the cars. My dad stayed quiet, nodding slowly, jaw set in a way I recognized as concern masked by control. They explain it calmly, too calmly. Probably people casing houses, my dad said. Looking for places with no lights on, no movement. My mom agreed. It happens, especially late at night. Their explanation made sense. It was logical, reassuring, but something about it felt incomplete, like it answered the what without touching the why. Why shine flashlights so openly? Why move so slowly, so deliberately? Why risk being noticed at all? Still, I wanted to believe them. I needed to. Within a week, my dad installed a Ring camera on the front door. Motion lights went up in the backyard. The house gained a quiet electronic vigilance, a sense that we were now watching back. My parents talked to a few neighbors. Some hadn't noticed anything. Others mentioned strange cars passing through late at night, but brushed it off. The consensus settled quickly. Coincidence, paranoia, overthinking. Life moved on. But I didn't forget. Every time I sat at my desk after that, the window felt different. Less like a view, more like an exposure. I found myself glancing up from my laptop more often, pausing my music when headlights passed, wondering if this was how fear quietly embeds itself, not through dramatic moments, but through subtle shifts in perception. And sometimes, late at night, I still wondered, what if the explanation we accepted was just the easiest one? What if we weren't being watched at random? And what if that flashlight wasn't searching for an empty house, but for something else entirely? The cameras went up quickly, like my parents were trying to seal a crack before anything else could leak through. I watched from the doorway as my dad drilled the mounting plate into the siding near our front door, his movements precise and practiced. He'd always been like that. Methodical when something threatened the sense of order he worked hard to maintain. The Ring camera blinked to life with a soft blue light, and for a moment, I felt oddly comforted by it. Like the house had gained an extra eye. Like we were no longer blind. But comfort, I learned, is fragile. In the days that followed, life returned to something close to normal. School filled my mornings with the usual noise. Lockers slamming, teachers lecturing, classmates laughing too loud in the hallways. I joked with friends, worried about homework, pretended I wasn't replaying that night every time someone mentioned security or crime in passing. Outwardly, I was fine. Internally, something had shifted. At night, my room no longer felt like a sanctuary. The same window that once framed a calm, empty street now felt like an opening, an invitation for something unwanted to look back in. I kept my blinds closed more often, even though I hated how boxed in it made the room feel. When I did leave them open, I caught myself staring out into the dark, waiting for movement, for light, for proof that the world outside was still predictable. Why did it feel like the night was watching me now, instead of the other way around? A week passed. Then 2. No alerts from the Ring camera. No strange cars. No neighbors reporting anything unusual. Slowly, the tension in the house eased. My mom stopped double-checking the locks before bed. My dad stopped reviewing the camera footage every morning with his coffee. The incident faded into the category of things that could have been bad but weren't. That's what everyone else called it, anyway. For me, it lingered like background noise, easy to ignore until you focused on it, impossible to fully shut off. I noticed small changes in myself. I jumped more easily. I paused my music whenever headlights passed the house, even if they were clearly just someone driving home. I stopped sitting directly in front of the window, angling my desk chair slightly to the side instead. Was that fear? Or was it instinct? One night, about a month after the cars disappeared, I was back at my desk making beats again. Same setup. Same headphones. Same late hour. The familiarity was comforting, like I was reclaiming something that had been tainted. I told myself I wasn't scared anymore. That the cameras worked. That the lights worked. That nothing like that would happen again. Then my laptop chimed. A notification. Motion detected. Front door. I froze. The sound was soft, almost polite, but it cut through the music like a knife. I stared at the screen, my cursor hovering uselessly over the track timeline. For a split second, I considered ignoring it. The camera triggered all the time, passing cars, stray cats, even heavy wind sometimes. Still, my chest tightened as I clicked the notification. The video loaded slowly, each buffering circle feeling like a test of my patience. When it finally appeared, I leaned closer, eyes scanning the black and white footage. Nothing. The porch was empty. No people. No movement. Just the faint glow of the porch light and the shadows it cast against the railing. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Probably nothing, I told myself. Probably just the sensor acting up. But as I closed the app, a thought crept in uninvited. What if the motion wasn't in front of the camera? What if it was just outside its view? I shook my head, annoyed at myself. I didn't want to become that person. The paranoid kid jumping at shadows, inventing threats where none existed. I put my headphones back on and forced myself to focus on the beat, layering sounds until the anxiety dulled into something manageable. Yet even as the music swelled, I couldn't stop thinking about the flashlight beam from that night. About how confidently it had moved. About how close it had come to my face. Had the people in those cars noticed the cameras later? Had they ever come back, quietly, just to check? Or had they moved on to another street, another house, another unsuspecting kid staring out a window? Weeks turned into months. Nothing happened. By spring, the incident felt almost distant, like a memory that lost sharpness the more it was retold. I even started joking about it with friends, framing it as a creepy but probably fake story to get reactions. They leaned in when I described the lights, the slow cars, the way I ducked under the window. "Dude, that's messed up," one of them said. "Probably just cops or something," another offered. "Or aliens," someone joked. I laughed along, but the laughter felt hollow. Because there was one detail I never mentioned. Something I hadn't even told my parents. On the night of the cars, right before I ducked under the window, I could have sworn the flashlight paused. Just for a fraction of a second. Not on the house. Not on the window. But directly where my face had been. Was that real? Or was it a memory reshaped by fear? I didn't know anymore. And that uncertainty bothered me more than any definitive explanation ever could. Because if I couldn't trust my own perception, what else might I be missing? One evening, while helping my dad take out the trash, I casually asked him if the cameras had ever picked up anything strange since they were installed. He shook his head. "Nothing worth worrying about," he said. "They do their job." I nodded, pretending that answer satisfied me. But later that night, lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, I wondered something that made my skin prickle. If nothing unusual was happening anymore, why did it still feel like something unfinished was waiting? It wasn't until much later that I realized how memory works, not as a straight line, but as a loop. Certain events pull others back into focus, like gravity bending light. The second occurrence didn't just stand on its own, it reached backward, tugging at something I'd buried because I didn't know what to do with it at the time. The first occurrence had happened years earlier. I was younger then. Too young to question adults when they told me something was nothing. Too young to understand that confusion doesn't always disappear just because someone older explains it away. Back then, fear didn't linger the way it did at 15. It came and went quickly, like a passing storm. Or so I thought. The memory resurfaced one afternoon in class while a teacher droned on about something I wasn't listening to. My notebook lay open on my desk, but instead of notes, I'd drawn a crude rectangle in the margin, a window. I stared at it longer than I meant to, and suddenly, I wasn't in school anymore. I was home. I must have been around 9 or 10. Maybe younger. It's hard to pin down exact ages when you're looking backward through fog. What I remember clearly is the time of day. Late afternoon, edging toward evening. The kind of in-between hour where shadows stretch but the sun hasn't fully given up yet. I was in the living room, sitting on the floor with a toy I can't even remember now. The TV was on, but I wasn't watching it. Outside, the neighborhood hummed with distant lawnmowers and passing cars. Normal sounds. Safe sounds. Then everything went quiet. Not abruptly, just subtly enough that I noticed. I looked toward the front window. That's when I saw it. A light. At first, I thought it was a reflection. Sunlight bouncing off a windshield, maybe. But it moved. Slowly. Deliberately. A bright white spot sliding across the glass like a searching eye. I remember standing up without thinking, drawn closer to the window by a mix of curiosity and something else I didn't have a word for yet. The light dipped, then rose, then vanished. A second later, there was a knock at the door. Not loud. Not urgent. 3 slow taps. My heart had started racing even then, which feels strange in hindsight. Kids aren't supposed to be suspicious. They're supposed to trust the world as it's presented to them. Yet something about that knock made my stomach hurt. I didn't answer it. Instead, I stood frozen, staring at the door like it might open on its own. Another knock followed, just as measured as the first. "Hello," a voice called out. A man's voice. Calm. Friendly. Too calm. I remember glancing down the hallway toward my parents' bedroom, wanting them to appear, to take control of the situation. But they weren't home. I'd forgotten that until that moment, and the realization hit me like cold water. Is anyone home? The voice asked. I don't know how long I stood there. Seconds. Minutes. Time felt slippery. Eventually, the light passed across the window again, briefly illuminating the room in a way that made it feel exposed. Then footsteps. They moved away from the door, down the porch steps, fading into nothing. I didn't tell anyone about it right away. When my parents got home later that evening, everything felt normal again. The sun had fully set. The house was warm with familiar sounds. I convinced myself it had been nothing. A salesman, maybe. Someone lost. Someone harmless. When I finally did mention it, days later, my mom frowned thoughtfully, my dad shrugged. Probably just someone looking for the previous owners, he said. Or selling something. That explanation had been enough for a while. But now, sitting at my desk years later, staring at the window in my bedroom, the memory felt heavier. Different. Connected. Two lights. Two searches. Two moments where someone, or something, had checked to see if anyone was home. Was that a coincidence? I started replaying both events side by side in my mind, lining up details like puzzle pieces. The calm voices. The deliberate movements. The way the lights swept instead of flashed. And the timing. Both times had happened when I was alone. The thought made my skin crawl. Had they known? Or was that just how chance works? Random moments colliding until they feel meaningful. That night, I went back through the Ring camera footage again, scrolling further back than usual. Days blurred together, each clip uneventful. Cars passing. Mail being delivered. Neighborhood life playing out in grayscale. Then I saw something that made my breath catch. A clip from 2 weeks earlier. The timestamp showed 2:13 a.m. I tapped it. The porch was empty, just like before. But this time, the motion alert hadn't been triggered by nothing. The camera had caught a sliver of movement at the very edge of the frame, just enough to activate it. A shadow. It lingered for less than a second before slipping out of view. No face. No body. Just the suggestion of someone standing too close to the camera to be seen. My first instinct was denial. Maybe it was a bug. Maybe it was a trick of the infrared. I replayed the clip over and over, slowing it down, watching the shadow move with purpose instead of randomness. If someone had been standing there, why hadn't they stepped fully into view? And why leave so quickly? I closed the app, my hands shaking. For the first time since the second occurrence, the explanation my parents had given me felt insufficient. The idea of random criminals casing houses didn't account for patience like that. Or restraint. Whoever, or whatever, this was, they didn't want to be seen. And suddenly, a question I hadn't dared to ask before surfaced fully formed in my mind. What if the first and second occurrences weren't separate events at all, but parts of the same story? Once the idea took hold that the two occurrences might be connected, it refused to let go. It settled into my thoughts quietly, the way mold grows in damp corners, unnoticed at first, then impossible to ignore once you see it. I started noticing patterns everywhere. Not dramatic ones. Nothing obvious enough to point to and say, that's it. Just small repetitions. Familiar rhythms. Details that echoed each other in ways that felt intentional rather than accidental. Lights. Timing. Observation. I began keeping my blinds open again, telling myself it was an act of defiance. In reality, it was closer to vigilance. I wanted to see the street before it could see me. I told myself I was in control of what I observed, even though part of me knew that wasn't entirely true. Late one night, as I sat at my desk without music, just listening to the house settle, I realized something unsettling. The neighborhood had a pattern too. Cars passed regularly until around midnight. After that, traffic thinned until the street became a corridor of stillness, broken only by the occasional distant engine or the rustle of wind through trees. Both occurrences had happened after that silence set in. Why then? I started asking questions I'd never voiced aloud. Not because I was afraid of the answers, but because saying them would make them real. What if the cars hadn't been random? What if the flashlight wasn't just searching, but confirming? And what if I hadn't been the only one watched? At school, I paid more attention to conversations I would have previously ignored. When classmates mentioned security cameras or motion lights, my ears perked up. Once, I overheard a kid from a few streets over talking about some weird guy knocking late at night years ago. The story didn't go anywhere. No details. No follow-up. But it was enough to lodge itself in my brain. That weekend, I walked the neighborhood in the afternoon, retracing the route the cars had taken that night. In daylight, everything looked harmless. Identical houses, manicured lawns, driveways stained with oil spots and chalk drawings. It felt almost ridiculous to be scared of a place so ordinary. Yet as I passed each house, I found myself imagining flashlight beams tracing windows, pausing, assessing. I stopped at the end of the street where the cars had turned off and stood there longer than necessary. Something about that corner felt wrong, not dangerous, just incomplete. Like it led somewhere I couldn't see. Was that just my imagination filling in gaps? Or had something important happened there that I'd never witnessed? That night, I did something I hadn't done before. I stayed up on purpose. No music. No distractions. Just me, the window, and the dark. The house fell asleep around me, doors closing, lights switching off, the soft hum of appliances settling into their nighttime rhythm. I sat still, hands resting on my desk, watching the street with an intensity that bordered on obsession. Time stretched. Minutes blurred into hours. Just when I began to feel foolish, I saw it. A light. Not sweeping. Not searching. Stationary. It was faint, almost easy to miss. A small, steady glow near the end of the street. Too low to be a street lamp. Too focused to be a passing car. My breath caught. The light didn't move. Didn't flicker. It simply existed, like it was waiting. I leaned closer to the glass, heart pounding loud enough that I was sure it could be heard outside. I scanned for a source, a phone screen, maybe, or a porch light I hadn't noticed before. Then it vanished. No fade. No motion. Just gone. I sat back slowly, the realization settling in with a cold certainty. Someone had been standing there. Watching. Not my house specifically. Not yet. Just the street. Just the pattern. Sleep was impossible after that. The next morning, I checked the camera footage from the night before. My hands already damp with sweat. The timestamp ticked past the hour I'd seen the light. Nothing appeared on screen. No alerts. No shadows. Whatever I'd seen hadn't crossed into the camera's awareness. That scared me more than if it had. It meant they knew where the cameras were. Or worse, it meant they didn't need to approach. I finally tried to talk to my parents again, but this time I framed it carefully. I asked if they remembered the knock from years ago. The light at the window. My mom hesitated. I remember you being scared, she said. But nothing came of it. My dad added, you're connecting things that don't need to be connected. Maybe he was right. But as I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling where a flashlight beam had once danced, I couldn't shake the feeling that the story wasn't finished. Because patterns don't stop on their own. They either break, or they escalate. And deep down, I knew which one I was afraid of. When the pattern breaks. The night the pattern broke didn't announce itself. There was no sense of dread hanging in the air, no instinctive warning buzzing in my chest. If anything, it felt disappointingly ordinary. Homework finished late. Phone plugged in. Lights off one by one. I lay in bed staring at the faint outline of my ceiling fan as it spun lazily above me, counting rotations the way I used to count sheep. At some point, I drifted. I don't know what woke me. That's the part that still bothers me. There was no sound I could identify afterward. No bang, no voice, no creak of the floor. Just a sudden, complete awareness, like my body had decided sleep was no longer an option. My eyes opened, and for a moment, I lay still, listening. The house was quiet. Too quiet. I turned my head slightly toward the window. The blinds were still open. And there was light in my room. Not bright. Not harsh. Just enough to notice. My heart began to pound as recognition set in. The light wasn't coming from the street lamp. It wasn't orange or diffused. It was white. Clean. Focused. Controlled. I didn't move. The beam wasn't sweeping this time. It rested low, angled just beneath the blinds, illuminating the edge of my desk, the corner of my wall. Whoever was holding it knew exactly where to place it without fully revealing themselves. That realization sent a wave of cold through me. How long had it been there? Had it been watching me sleep? The light shifted slightly upward. Not fast. Not careless. Intentional. It stopped just short of my face. I held my breath, every muscle locked in place, my mind screaming at my body to disappear. I felt like a kid again, standing in the living room years ago, staring at the door, knowing something was on the other side and hoping silence would make it leave. Seconds passed. Then something happened that I hadn't prepared for. The light flicked off. Immediately. No lingering. No hesitation. Darkness flooded the room. And then, footsteps. Not on the porch. Not on the street. On the gravel. They moved away from the window, slow and unhurried, as if whoever was out there had already gotten what they needed. I didn't chase the sound. I didn't run to my parents' room. I didn't even sit up. I stayed frozen until my muscles burned and my chest ached from shallow breaths. When I finally moved, the house was still. I checked the ring footage the next morning. Nothing. No alerts. No shadows. No evidence that anyone had been there at all. My parents believed me this time, but belief didn't change the outcome. We added more lights. Adjusted camera angles. Took every logical step available. And then, nothing happened. No more lights. No more cars. No more shadows. The pattern didn't escalate. It stopped. That's what unsettles me the most. Because patterns usually end for a reason. Sometimes they break because they fail. Sometimes because they succeed. Years have passed since then. I'm older now, with the distance adulthood gives you, the ability to rationalize, to downplay, to explain away what doesn't fit neatly into reality. I know all the reasonable answers. Motion sensors glitch. Memories distort. Fear fills in blanks. And yet, sometimes, late at night, when I catch my reflection in a dark window, I hesitate before turning off the light. I wonder what it would look like from the outside. What someone might see if they were standing just far enough back to remain unseen. I still ask myself questions I can't answer. Were they ever planning to come inside? Or was watching enough? And if they stopped, was it because they chose to? The most unsettling thought of all isn't that someone might have been watching me. It's that they might have decided they were done.